My patient Robert walked into my office 3 months ago. 67 years old, retired engineer, fasting glucose completely normal on his last 3 blood tests. His doctor told him he was fine, but Robert could not lose the weight around his midsection no matter what he ate. He was exhausted by 2 in the afternoon every single day, and he had not slept through the night in 2 years. I ordered one test his doctor had never ordered, fasting insulin. His number came back at 22 microunits per milliliter. Normal is below 10. Robert did not have a blood sugar problem. Robert had a chronically elevated insulin problem, and it had been silently driving every symptom he described for years before his glucose ever changed. The rule. Glucose is what most doctors measure. Insulin is what tells the real story. And by the time blood sugar rises on a standard panel, the insulin system has usually been under C for a decade. Today, I want to give you something concrete. 10 foods I recommend every patient with metabolic dysfunction, regardless of where they are in the process. Each one has a specific, documented mechanism that acts directly on insulin, sensitivity, on inflammatory signaling, or on the liver's overnight glucose output. By the end of this video, you will understand not just what to eat, see how insulin resistance actually works. Everything else will click into place in a way no 15-minute appointment ever had time to explain. And number 9 on this list, when we get there, is going to surprise you, because it targets the one mechanism that explains why some people do everything right and still cannot get their fasting numbers to move. Think about what insulin is supposed to do. Your pancreas releases it after a meal. It travels to your cells, binds to a receptor on the cell surface, and that binding sends a signal. Open the glucose channel, let the fuel in. That is the normal system working as designed. Now, here is what happens after years of chronically elevated insulin, which is exactly what a high glycemic diet produces over time. The cell receptor becomes desensitized. It stops responding to the signal with the same efficiency. The insulin is present, the receptor is there, but the conversation between them gets weaker and weaker. So the pancreas compensates by producing more insulin, which creates more desensitization, which demands even more insulin. It is a feedback loop that tightens across years before your glucose ever moves out of the normal range on a standard blood test. This is why I always say, glucose is what your doctor measures. Insulin is what tells the real story. Every food on this list works on one of 3 mechanisms in that system. Some slow the rate at which glucose enters your bloodstream, which directly reduces the insulin demand at every meal. Some work on the receptor signaling pathway itself, improving how efficiently your cells respond when insulin arrives. And some act on your liver, which quietly manufactures glucose overnight, and in people with insulin resistance, manufactures far too much of it. That third mechanism is the one most people never hear about. And it is the first food on this list that begins exploiting it in a way that costs almost nothing. Number 1 is fenugreek seed. A 2023 systematic review and meta-analysis published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences analyzed 10 randomized controlled trials involving 706 participants with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. A thick gel that coats the intestinal lining and slows glucose absorption dramatically. The glucose that used to flood into your bloodstream within 30 minutes now trickles in over 90. The insulin spike flattens. The pancreas works less. The home iron, over time, responds. 1 teaspoon of seeds soaked overnight in water, consumed before your first meal. The soaking activates the fiber. The taste is bitter, and I always warn patients about that up front. If that is a barrier, ground seeds stirred into yogurt work equally well. Start small. The fiber is potent, and the gut needs a few days to adapt. Number 2 is chia seeds. A 2024 systematic review published in Diabetes and Metabolic Syndrome analyzed 8 RCTs, measurable improvements in glycemic markers with chia supplementation. The mechanism is similar to fenugreek, but adds an omega-3 component in the form of alpha-linolenic acid, which contributes to the anti-inflammatory pathway I will cover in the next group. Number 3 is the one that surprises patients every time. It is a carbohydrate, a significant one, and yet the research consistently shows it works, improves glycemic control in people with insulin resistance. Lentils. A 2020 systematic review published in Nutrients reviewed glycemic markers with legume consumption. The data showed a positive effect on postprandial glucose and a reduction in fasting insulin with habitual legume intake. The mechanism is the starch architecture. The carbohydrate in a lentil is wrapped in a dense fiber and protein matrix that the digestive system dismantles slowly. What your body extracts from a lentil over 3 hours, it would extract from white rice in 30 minutes. Same caloric content, completely different insulin response. Half a cup to a cup of cooked lentils 3 or 4 times per week, replacing white rice or white potatoes. That is the swap I make with patients first. It costs almost nothing, and the glycemic dividend is real. Now I want to shift to a different mechanism entirely, because slowing glucose absorption is only word of the strategy. The second group works on the receptor itself. These foods contain compounds that improve the efficiency of the conversation between insulin and the cell. When insulin arrives, the cell responds faster, opens the glucose channel more fully, and clears the bloodstream more efficiently. The pancreas has to do less work to produce the same result. Number 4 is Ceylon cinnamon, and the type matters, which is why I always specify Ceylon. A 2023 umbrella meta-analysis published in Frontiers in Nutrition Pooled result, cinnamon supplementation reduced fasting plasma glucose by nearly 11 milligrams per deciliter on average, reduced fasting insulin by 2 units, and reduced HOMA-IR by 0.61 points. In a patient already trending toward a second medication, a 0.6 reduction in HOMA-IR is clinically meaningful. A carbohydrate meal, those transporters become more responsive. The insulin signal reaches the cell, and the cell acts on it more efficiently. A quarter to half a teaspoon added to oatmeal or coffee with a carbohydrate-containing meal. The timing is intentional. You want the polyphenols present when the insulin signal is active. Number 5 is apple cider vinegar. I know what some of you are thinking. I hear it everywhere. Week in my practice. Is this really science or is this a folk remedy? Let me show you the mechanism. The active compound is acetic. It inhibits an enzyme called sucrase, which is responsible for breaking down sucrose and starches in the small intestine. Muscle cells are pulling glucose out of circulation through a separate door, reducing the burden on the insulin system entirely. 1 tablespoon in a full glass of water, 10 to 15 minutes before your largest carbohydrate meal. Always diluted. Straight vinegar causes enamel erosion and esophageal irritation. And here is the warning I give every single patient without exception. These foods stack on top of your medication. If you are on pills or insulin for blood sugar, they pull in the same direction as your prescription. Used together without monitoring, they can pull glucose too low. Bring this list to your prescribing physician. Let them track your numbers. Let them walk your dose down as your metabolic function improves. That partnership is how this works safely. Coming up, I am going to show you the 5 foods that address the 2 mechanisms I have not covered yet. The chronic low-grade inflammation that garbles the signal between insulin and the cell receptor, and the liver's overnight glucose production that explains high fasting numbers even when dinner was perfectly calibrated. Those 2 mechanisms are the reason some people do everything right with diet and still cannot get their fasting glucose to balance. I changed my diet 3 months ago. I cut the carbs, I lost some weight, and my fasting glucose barely moved. Why isn't it working? And the answer, almost every time, is that they addressed glucose absorption, but left the inflammatory pathway completely untouched. Here's what we know about chronic systemic inflammation and insulin resistance. When the body is in a persistent state of low-grade inflammation, inflammatory cytokines directly with insulin receptor signaling. They disrupt the phosphorylation cascade that allows the receptor to transmit the glucose uptake signal into the cell. The insulin arrives, the receptor is present, but the inflammatory environment is cutting the communication line between them. That is the real mechanism at play, and it is the part that most videos on this topic completely skip over. Number 6 is fatty fish, twice a week. A 2021 systematic review and the inflammatory cytokines disrupting insulin receptor signaling. Salmon when the budget allows. Canned sardines and canned mackerel for the rest of the month. Both carry the same EPA and DHA content. A palm-sized portion twice a week is sufficient to maintain the anti-inflammatory effect at a cellular level. In my experience, I have seen HOMA-IR improvements within 8 weeks of consistent fatty fish consumption in patients who had plateaued on dietary changes alone. Number 7 is walnuts. The alpha-linolenic acid in walnuts converts to EPA in the body, contributing to the same anti-inflammatory pathway. But walnuts bring something additional, a fiber, fat, and protein combination that produces almost no postprandial glucose response on its own. Number 8 is eggs and avocado at breakfast. I address these together because their combined effect is what I want you to understand. Eggs are nearly pure protein and fat with minimal carbohydrate, which means they contribute almost no glucose to the morning bloodstream in a ratio that further slows gastric emptying. Together, they produce what the research calls a second meal effect. A calm, low-insulin breakfast does not just stabilize your morning glucose, it reduces the insulin response at your next meal as well. The metabolic momentum of a low-insulin breakfast carries forward across the entire day. That is not an opinion. That is a documented mechanism, and it costs almost nothing to implement starting tomorrow morning. Number 9. This is the one I promised at the beginning of this video. The food that addresses the mechanism that explains why fasting numbers stay elevated, even after a careful dinner, even after cutting the carbs, even after the post-meal readings improve. With insulin resistance, the liver's overnight glucose production, a process called hepatic gluconeogenesis, and it manufactures too much of it. That is why fasting glucose is often the worst reading of the day, despite eating nothing for 8 hours. A randomized double-blind clinical trial published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition studied 81 patients with type 2 diabetes. Participants consuming 10 grams per day of broccoli sprout powder for 4 weeks showed a significant decrease in serum insulin and HOMA-IR. The compound responsible is sulforaphane, which is present in concentrations far higher in 3-day-old sprouts than in mature broccoli. The overnight factory to slow down. I grow broccoli sprouts in a mason jar. Rinse the seeds twice daily, ready in 3 to 4 days. A quarter cup most mornings, raw, on a sandwich, or mixed into eggs. Raw is essential. Heat degrades the sulforaphane. This is one of the highest leveraged, lowest cost interventions in the entire list, and almost no one talks about it. Number 10 is plain Greek yogurt or kefir. The gut microbiome has a direct relationship with insulin sensitivity that researchers are only beginning to map fully. What we know is this: short-chain fatty acids produced by gut bacteria, particularly butyrate, improve insulin receptor sensitivity in peripheral tissues. They also release insulin only in proportion to the glucose actually present, which is a fundamentally more efficient system than what insulin resistance produces. Fermented dairy, specifically plain unsweetened Greek yogurt and kefir, consistently supports the bacterial populations that produce these short-chain fatty acids. Half a cup to a cup daily. Plain, with no added sugar. If you are adding cinnamon to this, you are stacking mechanisms in the same bowl. Here is how I would actually approach this if I were starting from scratch with a new patient at home IR of 2.5 and a fasting glucose trending upward. Week 1, change breakfast. 2 whole eggs, half an avocado every day. Lowest friction change begins recalibrating the morning insulin environment immediately. Week 2, add 1 tablespoon apple cider vinegar diluted in water before dinner. If you have a glucose meter, watch what happens to your post-dinner reading. The data will motivate everything that follows. Week 3, introduce lentils 3 times per week, replacing white rice or potatoes. Add Ceylon cinnamon to your morning coffee or oatmeal daily. Week 4, add soaked fenugreek seeds before breakfast, chia seeds in water at some point during the day, and begin eating fatty fish twice weekly. Replace your afternoon snack with a small handful of walnuts. Week 5, start growing broccoli sprouts. Add Greek yogurt or kefir daily. This is just the week patients, in my experience, begin seeing fasting glucose move in ways the earlier changes alone did not produce. The full stack across 5 weeks is not overwhelming. It is sequential. Each layer adds a mechanism, and the mechanisms compound. One more time, because this matters more than anything. What else I have said today, if you are on medication for blood sugar, including metformin, insulin, or any other glucose-lowering prescription, discuss this protocol with your physician before you start. These foods work in the same direction as your medication. It has 3 distinct mechanisms: glucose absorption rate, receptor signaling efficiency, and hepatic glucose production. A complete strategy addresses all 3. The 10 foods I described today do exactly that. Not because they are magic, because they have documented, reproducible effects on the specific biological pathways driving the dysfunction your doctor is measuring, and in some cases, the dysfunction your doctor has not measured yet. If you know someone dealing with high fasting glucose, or someone who keeps being told their numbers are fine while their body is telling a different story, send them this video. The information is free, the foods cost almost nothing, and the 15-minute appointment they are counting on rarely has. That is the foundation under everything I described today. I will see you there.